As humans, we have a preternatural desire to contain, to create barriers and boundaries that keep certain people, objects, or energies out, while holding others securely inside. We construct containers and cups, walls and gates, dams and levees, all in the hope of keeping certain desirable qualities within and other ostensibly toxic, dangerous, or unwanted things without. And this urge is far from new. We have been containing and sectioning off our worlds, to varying degrees of success, I might add, for the entirety of our human history. And when you think about it, the desire to contain confers many adaptive advantages onto us as humans. For starters, containers help us keep things in. Prehistoric cups were sometimes fashioned from shells and hollowed-out stones, and in ancient Mesopotamia, cups were used to transport goods, drink alcoholic beverages, and all sorts of other highly essential activities. Containers also play the equally important role in keeping things out. Take, for instance, moats. You know, those ditches of water that surround castles and other cool structures, often dramatically portrayed as being filled to the brim with crocodiles or snakes or lava. Some of the earliest moats have been uncovered around ancient Egyptian castles, with the main purpose, of course, being a preliminary line of defense against the impending darkness, keeping invaders and intruders of all kinds on the other side of the wall. Whether you want to attribute these attempts at containment to tidiness, neuroticism, or simple functionality, one thing is for sure. We humans like to bucket, to separate, and to otherwise control the floodgates of our own little worlds. We try our darndest to separate the nice from the naughty, the healthy from the sick, and the light from the dark. But we are not always successful in keeping the darkness out. All too often, the shadows from without find a way to creep inside. The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe is a haunting example of what happens when the external world seeps into our internal landscape, wreaking havoc on our mind and body and emotions. In the story, the narrator becomes rather obsessed with an old man, or more specifically, the old man's clouded, pale blue, vulture-like eye. An eye that struck the narrator as, well, evil. This physical feature distressed the narrator to such an extent that he chose to murder the old man. And so, one night, while rather creepily watching the old man sleep, the narrator fumbled and roused him from dream time. In that startled moment, he caught a glimpse of the old man's evil eye, prompting him to lunge at the man and kill him. He then set to work dismembering the man's body and concealing it under the floorboards. Now, this should have been the end of the story, but it wasn't. Because the old man, while very much dead and very much buried, did not stay in the container he was intended to remain in forevermore. The narrator heard the dead man's heart beating, his telltale heart quite literally, night after night, louder and louder, violently thumping, a rhythm that possessed the crevices of the narrator's mind until finally, he went mad. The boundaries between this external stimulus and his internal peace had been irrevocably breached, He couldn't keep the old man's heartbeat out, and the sensory overwhelm ate him alive. He ripped up the floorboards and confessed to police exactly what he had done. This gruesome story teaches us, among other things, that even when we try to keep people or feelings or sensations out, we are not always successful. Sometimes we let unwanted things inside. And there is a group of us that is particularly susceptible to the influences of the outside world. You see, each of us has an invisible container around us, but our containers vary in their degree of thickness. Some of us have beefy, fortified containers, while others of us have rather delicate, gossamer containers. And this latter group of us, those with thin containers, are more penetrable, vulnerable, permeable, malleable, and susceptible to the influences of the outside world. Having a thin container blesses us with the ability to let more light into our lives. But this gift, as demonstrated by Poe, also comes with a dark curse. With this openness, we are more likely to let the shadows in as well. Hi, I'm Jessica Carson, and welcome to Patina, a podcast that examines the surprising beauty of all that is dark, shadowy, and seemingly tarnished about the human experience. Let's play. Boundaries of the mind refers to the degree of separateness or connection between us as a person and the world around us. And people tend to fall into one of two camps. We either have a thick boundary of the mind or a thin boundary of the mind. Someone with a thick boundary of the mind will be sturdy and organized and clear. They are the oak trees in our lives, demonstrating a remarkable and sometimes infuriating consistency, decisiveness, concentration, and structure. They know who they are and who they are not, and have an amazing ability to compartmentalize their lives, keeping their thoughts and feelings in very separate, very tidy containers, like Marie Kondo, but for emotions. The distinctions in their lives are very clear. They have a past, a present, and a future. They claim a definitive sense of space. They have no flimsiness around their sexual identity, and they tend to see life as quite binary. Good versus evil, Democrat versus Republican, you get the idea. They have little interest in muddying their sense of self with enticing identities they stumble across on vacation, integrating outlandish ideas into their intellectual life, or absorbing themselves in a relationship to the point of change. To give you a deeper sense, some such historical thick-boundaried folks include the likes of Margaret Thatcher, Neil Armstrong, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and Franklin D. Roosevelt. But there are others among us, your host very much included, who snuggle closer into our surrounding environment. We quite literally have thinner boundaries between ourselves and the people, ideas, and energies in our proximity. We are, in a sense, more porous. We take on, we absorb, we merge. Those of us with thin boundaries of the mind are fluid and open and vulnerable. we are more like the willow trees. We are bendable, whimsical, and constantly changing, for better or for worse. Our thin boundaries allow us to readily evolve ourselves, become more or less like others, lose ourselves to experience, and absorb vast amounts of sensory information at all times, a tendency that makes it a bit difficult to focus on one thing. We literally don't know how to separate our thoughts from our feelings and view everything in life as existing on a spectrum. In a sense, our lives involve a lot of nuance, caveats, and cognitive flexibility. Thanks to these thin boundaries, we excel at adopting new cultural norms, spiritual beliefs, lifestyle habits, awe-inspiring ideas, and titillating partners, be them friends or flings. Hint: if you've ever considered turning your life upside down for your romantic partner of a month, you may very likely have thin boundaries of the mind. But fear not, we are in pretty good company. Think about folks like Jim Morrison, Oscar Wilde, Frida Kahlo, and Stevie Nicks. This is the crew we will be spending our time with today. If you are sitting there wondering if you have thin boundaries of the mind, here are a few dead giveaways. You are open-minded, sensitive, vulnerable, and creative, with an ability to view the world in shades of gray rather than boring old black and white. You tend to blur the boundary between fantasy and reality, with a particular knack for recalling your dreams, tapping into lucid dreams, and experiencing both daydreaming and nightmares. And whether or not you've come to fully explore this side of yourself yet, you are more prone to the mystical and the magical. Us thin-boundaried folks are particularly prone to unusual perceptual experiences like déjà vu, hypnosability, premonition, clairvoyance, and intense imagination. We are also more likely to subscribe to New Age beliefs and practices like yoga, Reiki, divination, and astrology. Sorry, it's just so very me. Research has also shown that those of us with thin boundaries even report seeing auras more than controls. You know, those bubbles of color around all of us. Between our rather magical thinking, emotional sensitivity, and sense of connectedness, we are basically unicorns. Sounds pretty marvelous, no? It is, truly. At least until it isn't. Once upon a time, there was a man of boundless potential. As a young man, he proposed to a woman, Agnes, but was promptly left by her. Shortly thereafter, he met another woman, Hadley, who quickly became his wife, and the pair rather hurriedly moved to Paris. Soon after, he had an affair, divorcing that wife, and promptly marrying a new woman, Pauline, sealed with a move to, of all places, Florida. A hot second later, he met another woman, Martha, who he would also eventually marry and, get a place together in Cuba. This relationship was followed by a woman named Mary, who he would later marry after divorcing Martha and ultimately live with in Idaho. While this thin-boundaried man won a Nobel Prize in Literature and lived a mighty fascinating life, complete with bullfighting, deep-sea fishing, midnights in Paris, and lots of booze, his thin boundaries were also what did him in. He suffered greatly in mind, body, and spirit, unable to establish the homeostasis between his inner and outer worlds. Ultimately, and very sadly, he committed suicide. Of course, this thin-boundaried figure is none other than Ernest Hemingway. In his words, quote, "The most painful thing is losing yourself in the process of loving someone too much and forgetting that you are special too," end quote. While Hemingway's thin boundaries affected far more than just his love life, his litany of star-crossed lovers is arguably the most provocative manifestation of his wispy, airy container. You see, Hemingway and us contemporary thin-boundaried folks embody what Jungian psychologists would call the lover archetype, which, don't be confused, is not all about romance. Those of us with the lover archetype experience life richly through our senses, embody a zest for sensual pleasures, and have an intense and passionate relationship with the world around us. But this tendency comes with the lover's burden as well. We can become so lost in the object of our passion, whether that be a person, a project, or a problem we are trying to solve, that we can lose our sense of self. In short, containers are a very real issue for us. When us thin-boundaried folks struggle to manage our multitudes, our petal-like openness can allow far too much into our being, resulting in a flimsy sense of self and a shaky set of values. We can struggle to decipher what is reality and what is fantasy, finding ourselves in states of star-crossed confusion, cyclically asking ourselves questions like, who am I? What do I believe? What is my purpose? In relationships, we tend to fantasize about others until they become larger than life, with our lofty pedestal holding these poor souls to a standard that they will inevitably fall short of, ultimately crushing us when they do. With all of our tender openness, we can latch on to others, merge with others, mimic others, and turn ourselves inside out for others, a vulnerable demonstration of passion that is rarely reciprocated and, when it is, often has tragic consequences. Because we exude a sweet, almost naive, childlike openness, we are also vulnerable to manipulation and energy vampires, as others easily recognize they can take advantage of our chiffon-like permeability. They realize they can get inside our container. In the workplace, our vulnerability may make us particularly sensitive to criticism and unwanted feedback, something I have never been accused of. As lovers are wont to do, we may fluctuate between extreme passion and apathy, leaving projects unfinished and emails unanswered, baffling others who thought us to be fiercely excited about a task just moments before. When dealing with thick-boundaried colleagues, our ideas may seem, or may actually really be, so unconventional and fantastical that they are nearly impossible to land in reality. Long story short, our thin boundaries can make quite a mess of things. But I want to interject here for a moment, as myself, Jessica, speaking personally as someone who bears the blessing and burden of thin boundaries. Candidly, I am all too familiar with the otherworldly confusion, manipulation, and heartache shepherded in by the loosey-goosey bodyguard of my thin boundaries. In my younger years especially, I really truly resented thick-boundaried people. I was jealous of their sturdiness and certainty, and I hungered for the clarity and concision that seemed to cut through their life like a knife. I wanted my pursuit of meaning through work and relationships with others and my relationship with myself to be as straightforward as theirs seemed to be. But over the years of fighting with these deep sensitivities, which, after much kicking and screaming, I've come to realize are genuine aspects of my inborn wiring, I've developed a deep reverence for the ways in which this nature is rare and valuable and in many ways instrumental to the creative life. I now see my thin-boundaried nature, when kept in check, of course, as the greatest blessing to myself and my capacity to do this work. It offers me empathy, creativity, curiosity, and a genuine lover-like relationship with this thing called life. So, even though this podcast is not about me, I just wanted to share this with you, in case you're a bit sensitive too. Quote, "The truly creative mind in any field is no more than this: a human creature born abnormally and humanly sensitive. To him, a touch is a blow, a sound is a noise, a misfortune is a tragedy, a joy is an ecstasy, a friend is a lover is a god, and failure is death. Add to this cruelly delicate organism the overpowering necessity to create, so that without the creating of music or poetry or books or buildings or something of meaning, his very breath is cut off from him. He must create, must pour out creation. By some strange, unknown, inward urgency, he is not really alive unless he is creating." End quote. These words by American novelist Pearl S. Buck are some of my very favorites, as they capture all that is light and dark and inconveniently in between about the thin-boundaried spirit. I don't wish to glamorize suffering or perpetuate the plight of the troubled artist, as we need not suffer tragically nor be a stereotypical artist to relate to thin boundaries of the mind. Instead, I wish to shine a light on the surprising beauty of living within a silken, netted, lace-like container. Perhaps more a chrysalis than a container. There is value in this way too. It is my personal belief that to affect the world, we must allow ourselves to be affected. We must let inputs and outputs flow through the sensory jamboree that is our nervous system, collecting, selecting, integrating, and expressing our relationship with the world in a way that only we can. And so, here we have two classes of people. One that dons a suit of armor, and the other that runs around nearly naked. Is one better than the other? Likely not. But is one more viable for incubating the creative act? Likely, yes. Perhaps it is the fate for every creative mind to struggle with the size, shape, and permeability of our container as we, in an ongoing cycle, create them, break them down, repair them, and negotiate them. Life may very well be more comfortable with a solid and upright container, that I cannot deny. But it is perhaps less conducive to fertile fruition. In the words of playwright Florida Scott Maxwell, life does not accommodate you. It shatters you. It is meant to, and it couldn't do it any better. Every seed destroys its container, or else there would be no fruition." End quote. And so, do thin boundaries of the mind let the darkness creep in? Why, yes, perhaps they do. But is it in the darkness that these creative seeds can take root? Well, that's up for you to decide. That's all for today's episode of Patina, written and produced by me, Jessica Carson, with the support of my partner in crime, Jeffrey Sayers. With any luck, it's helped you to look into a shadowy, seemingly tarnished aspect of your human experience with a bit more hope and a lot more curiosity. If you like Patina, I think you'll really enjoy our other offerings at the Magnum Opus Academy. From online courses, to books, to group and individual coaching and consulting, we warmly invite you as a seeker to dive deep with us on all that is beautiful about the shadows within yourself, your company, your relationships, and our society. So give us a follow and maybe even drop us a note on how we can play together. After all, the shadows are a lot more friendly when we play.